Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have a liftoff.
Two Doomed Men podcast, the greatest, ready? The greatest podcast in the history of the country, perhaps even the world by far. I don't think anyone comes close.
What's up, Doom Nation, and welcome back. You are listening to the Two Doom Men podcast. As always, it's Skaggs and yours truly, the captain, and a special guest, one of our favorite guests, Professor Nick Giordano. What's up, buddy?
Not much. How's it going, boys?
It's going great. Thank you for coming on.
Great. It is great.
Yeah, getting more interesting as we inched closer to cheaper groceries or World War III, a.k.a.
Why, is there a lot going on in this day and age?
You know, it's been a little busy lately, like we were talking about before we started. So thank you for taking the time. With everything going on in the world, this is probably the craziest election cycle, the busiest election cycle, at least since I've been alive.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything else can compare to it, at least in our lifetimes. So thank you for taking the time. And why don't you shout out where everybody can find your show and all that good stuff?
Everyone can go to pasreport.com or follow me at pasreport and get all the content from there.
Nick
Awesome.
does great work over there. They're like 20, 30-minute episodes and no ranting and raving like Skaggs and I do.
Oh, no, there's ranting and raving. There's some ranting and raving. But...
Well, no off-topic ranting and raving, at least. Yeah, you don't talk about Lord of the Rings and all that.
No.
Well, J.D. Vance is a big Lord of the Rings guy, so.
Yes, he is.
So Professor Giordano, I wanted to have you on. You're obviously one of our favorite guests. It's like your third or fourth time on the show now. Especially this close to the election, just pick your brain on the election itself. And then I thought later maybe we could talk about the Israel-Hezbollah stuff is really popping off the last week or two. So I could get your take maybe on that. But I thought we could pick up right where we left off last week. Chris and I went to the rally, Trump's rally at Nassau Coliseum in Long Island. You're from Long Island, aren't you?
I am, but I avoid large crowds like that.
You should have came out, pal.
It was fun. So we did our whole episode there. If you're listening on the audio, go check those out on our channels because it didn't make sense to put on audio. It was more something you want to view. So I wanted to start by talking about New York. And Trump has invested a lot of time into New York, I think, for a Republican candidate. We also went to the Bronx rally that he had, and he drew pretty big crowds at both. You drive around in New York or here in Connecticut where I'm at, you see Trump flags. You see there's Trump energy in a blue area. Do you think it's possible at all that he could actually flip New York, from Kamala Harris?
Well, I mean, in this election cycle, you can't rule anything out, right? I never would have predicted 2 assassination attempts.
By
I never would have
BlackRock actors.
predicted the Democrats anointing Kamala Harris without a fight. Yet here we are. So you can't rule anything out. And one of the interesting things when it comes to New York, a lot of people don't remember, but Zeldin only lost by 5 points. And historically, that's extremely close over the last several election cycles. So if Trump is able to build on Zeldin and what Zeldin did, there is potential for it. Now, would I put money on it? No, I won't put money on it. We're still a deep blue state. I believe there are 8 million Democrats outnumber Republicans 3-1 as far as registrations go. But there's a lot of people that are fed up in New York. And you see that people that normally wouldn't look the Republicans' way are now looking at them thinking maybe they could solve the illegal immigration crisis that we're facing, where our government's spending billions upon billions of dollars on them, and yet we the people are suffering. So New York can possibly be in play, and I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand, especially like you pointed out. He did the Bronx rally, and then he did Nassau Coliseum, but even more important was when he went to the bodega, when he went to the construction site as he was on trial. And I think that Trump should do more of those types of events. I think that he should walk into barbershops, particularly black barbershops, and start talking to the people. That's retail politics. And Trump is great when it comes to that type of retail politics. It's something that's different. It's something that'll gain an enormous amount of attention. You don't always need to do the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people rallies. He does things like that. It's going to make an impact. And so I wouldn't rule it out. The only problem is that you have the really competitive states, the Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, where obviously they're much closer. And those are states that if Trump picks off, let's say, Pennsylvania, well, he wins the whole thing. Kamala Harris cannot win if she loses Pennsylvania unless Trump loses North Carolina. But yeah, it would be amazing if New York went for Trump. And if New York did go for Trump, the election's over. There's no path to victory for Kamala Harris. People like to say, like, Republicans have the advantage with the Electoral College. That's a lie. That's a myth. Democrats are the ones that start off with the advantage. They got some of the biggest, most populous states, particularly California and places like New York. But yeah, it would be an interesting dynamic to say the least. But if Trump won New York, that means it's going to be a clear, convincing, overwhelming, crushing defeat for Kamala Harris and Democrats.
I don't think it's impossible. In the last election, I believe New York came in at like 46% red. It was close. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the only thing that the reason that Zeldin lost was actually because of the outflow. All the people that left New York during the coronavirus, that was the margin Zeldin lost by. So if those people never left, we could have taken back New York. Thank you, those people that left. Yeah. You just ruined it for all of us.
I left. I'm those people.
Yeah, me too, although I'm not far. But I saw this example at the time, and I've actually brought it up many times on our show. I brought it up to some of her campaign staff when we saw them at the Bronx rally. But Tina Forte, who is a Republican running in the Bronx area against AOC, a few years ago lost, but the turnout was so low. I think AOC only had like 150,000 people turn out and vote for her, and Tina Forte had like 80,000. When you look at the rolls, there's like 300,000 plus Republicans registered in that area, and if they all just showed up and voted, she'd have won. She would have actually beat AOC. That was shocking to me because of how nationally popular AOC is, right? But it told me that there isn't a local like popularity for her necessarily that there is nationally. And if you just had a game plan in the area and you worked really hard to just make sure everyone turns out to vote, you actually can start like chipping away in some of these areas that are deep blue. And I asked this to some of her campaign staff at the Bronx rally. They had like no answer for me, like how they would plan on getting everyone to turn out. So it was really disappointing. Captain was he was the first one who was trying to talk to them, and they were like drinking in the background. And
I got completely bum rushed by like two drunk guys.
I had to like jump in and like pick up where the interview that he left off because the other guy like grabbed him and whatnot. So it's disappointing to see stuff like that, but I feel like there is a path in our area to actually make some strides. You just had on somebody on your podcast.
Yes, very good episode.
Really
Steve
interesting.
Gillen.
Yeah, with the common sense contract, correct?
Correct. And well, when you look at New York, what's frustrating is voter turnout always stinks in the United States. I mean, we preach about this idea of freedom, we preach about liberty, we preach that we get to vote in elections, and then election day comes. And if you look at local elections, only 10 to 20% of the population turns out to vote in local elections. When we get to statewide elections, it's about 35 to 50%. And then when we get to the presidential elections, well, then it gets upwards of anywhere from 45 to 60%, usually around the 47, 48% mark. Obviously, 2020 was the whole coronavirus where we saw higher turnout, but we also saw all these mail-in ballots. But you're right. I mean, the reality is that if you just turn out all the registered voters in the area, you win. It's as simple as that. I mean, elections aren't complicated. It's a game of math. The more people you turn out, the better your chances of winning an election. And unfortunately, the Republican Party apparatus in New York State has done a terrible job of getting people to the polls. Often they have written areas off. They long surrendered areas to the Democrats. A lot of times they won't even put a candidate up against the Democrat, thinking that they can't possibly win. But if you start to mobilize the people that are registered Republican in your area and even start targeting independents, well, no, now you're increasing your chance of success. You know, I think it was the 2023 election for just New York City local offices, Suffolk County, Long Island local. I think the voter turnout was like 7%.
Yeah, that's abysmal.
That's it. I mean, that is abysmal. But if you're able to turn out another 150,000 voters, well, you got the election. And I don't know why the Republican Party hasn't understood that. Another problem with the Republican Party is they don't know how to galvanize the communities that they've long ignored. I mean, I see the public comments from people going to the town hall meetings that are screaming and yelling about the problems the city's facing with the crime, with the looting, with the assaults, with the illegal immigrants setting up shop on streets. Where's the Republican representative standing right behind these people saying, I hear you. I know what you're going through, and just give us a chance. We know we let you down in the past, but give us a chance because we're going to fight for you. And if the Republicans did that, they win, and that's it. Game over. But unfortunately, they don't. And the Republicans do have a big problem. I don't think people realize, but the last time a Republican candidate won the popular vote for president, the majority popular vote, not just the popular vote, the majority, you have to go all the way back to George H.W. Bush in 1988. Okay, even in 2004, when George W. Bush won the popular vote and the Electoral College vote, he still didn't win a majority of the popular vote. So Republicans have to understand that there's registered voters in these areas who don't go and vote because they think, well, it's a waste of my time. The area is so deep blue that there's no point in me voting. But if you could convince them to turn out, if you can convince other people to volunteer, to get involved, to help their neighbors get to the polls, well, no, now you can turn things around.
So if I could piggyback off of all that, in my personal life, I've been running into, oh my God, I've lost count of how many people who just, and they're all New Yorkers for the most part, they're just demoralized. Kamala's already got it in the bag. They're going to do whatever it takes. And I'm sorry, YouTube, we are not talking about rigged elections. These are just the opinions of people who are not on the show. But they're so demoralized and down that they don't even want to go and vote because they already believe it's in the bag. How do we bring up people's spirits? Or, you know, because I sit there and I tell them, like, you know, it takes 5 minutes. Go wait on the line, go vote, because at least you could say, even if it's in the bag for her, at least you tried to fight, you know? So,
well, I'm not good at lifting spirits. I'm good at shaming people. Okay. I like to crush souls and shame them. And the reality is those people have no one to blame but themselves, because for every single person, whether they're in New York or any other state that complains about what's going on, about what's taking place. First of all, when it comes to elections, if you want to fix the voting process, you have to win elections first, and you have to figure out a way around that. But secondly, Republicans do a great job. And I'm talking about ordinary. I'm not even talking about the party apparatus. I'm talking about ordinary people. We do a great job at complaining. We're really good at doing that. What they don't do, though, is say, you know what, let me learn about the candidate that's running in my district and let me volunteer for their campaign. Let me spend an hour a week, maybe 2 hours a week if I have the time. And I get it. We all have our lives. We're all busy. I understand that. We got families to raise, and it's not always easy to do that. But how many of the same people saying, well, it's all rigged, we don't have a shot, there's no point in going out to vote, how many of them actually even bothered to volunteer for a campaign? I'm not talking
Zero.
about just giving money. I'm talking about go to campaigns, hand out pamphlets, go door to door, help these candidates get elected. So if you're someone that truly believes that it's all rigged, then shut up and don't complain because you're not doing anything to help the situation. Again, the reality is that it's a game of turnout. It's a game of numbers. And the more people that go out there and actually vote, the better your chance of success in taking this country back and bringing some semblance of normalcy back to the scene.
Do you think that there's a conscious effort somewhere to kind of condition people to be demoralized and think that there is nothing I can do, so I shouldn't even waste my time?
No, I think people are lazy.
Okay.
Seriously, I think, listen, there's social engineering going on with it throughout the education system, throughout the media, where they're programming everyone to believe that government's the solution to every problem that we face. Okay, that's real. That's actually happening. But as far as people being demoralized, well, no, that's on them. They're allowing themselves to be demoralized because they're lazy. They want to make excuses for why they don't get involved. They want to make excuses for why they're not volunteering their time and effort. Listen, we all got a civic responsibility. It's not like, I ask my students, okay, so government exists, but what's our role within the system? Like, is it really just voting and we pay our taxes and then once in a while we got to do jury duty? Like, is that the only role that we have in this country? And the answer is no, it goes far beyond that. But people tend to try and take the easy way out. It's much easier to complain on X or Facebook or Instagram than to go out and actually do something about it. And you don't even have to bring it to the elections. You could just look at a myriad of issues. So take the whole trans issue. 80% of the public agrees with me on the trans issue. Like, no, little children should not be given hormones to change their sex. Little children should not be able to get surgeries to cut off their genitals and be mutilated. And that, we should at least wait till they're of an adult age to make those types of decisions. 80% of me will agree on that. Yet most of them just don't speak out. They're cowards, and it's not impacting them directly. So they'll say, well, you know what? It's not really happening in my school. They're not really pushing it. So I don't need to speak out and say anything about it. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and my head down because it's so much easier to be quiet. It's so much easier to complain that the system's rigged rather than trying to, if the system's rigged, we, the people, allowed it to get rigged because we don't hold anyone accountable in this system.
Yeah, I think also, so one of my gripes with some Trump supporters, and I'm going to generalize a bit and say they're most likely the boomer types, is that they have this opinion that, like, if Trump loses this election, it's over. The country is lost. Now, I'm not saying it's not a dire scenario if he were to lose the election. I also don't think he's just going to magically fix everything if he becomes president. It's going to be very difficult. There's going to be work to be done. But I feel like when people have that mentality, it's almost as if they are looking for someone else to solve all their problems, and they've essentially tapped Donald Trump in to do that for them. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't need to be done, that there should be a good president who attacks A, B, and C, but I feel like there's this weird psychological component in America where everyone is just looking for someone else to solve their problems or government to solve their problems, even the conservative MAGA type people, where, again, I don't know, like, if Trump were to lose the election, I'm not going to just disappear, me. Like, I'm going to continue doing what I do and living
until
my
they
life.
open up the re-education camps. Then
Right. And then
we're the first two in there.
I'll have to be dragged kicking and screaming is what I'm saying. But I find this odd thing. I don't know if you've ever thought about that before, where it seems like that's it. This is it. If it doesn't work out this time, it's over. And I don't like that idea of, like, there's no self-reliance. I'm not saying it's not important to vote in a federal election, but there has to be some sort of, especially from conservatives. I consider myself a libertarian, but from conservatives, that's what I'm thinking of when I say the word conservative. Someone who, like, stands on their own and is, self-sufficient and like a farmer with his hands in the mud. But instead it's like, well, no, the federal government, if I can't If I can't get my guy to take over the federal government, then my whole life is over.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reality is self-reliance is one of our civic responsibilities. I mean, listen, the federal government was never meant to manage all these different issues that they're getting their hands into. The only reason they have gotten their hands into it is because of people. And I'm not just talking about Democrats and progressives. Even Republicans and conservatives will turn to the government, the federal government, to solve every problem. It's like we kind of blocked out state and local governments. Most people have no idea what the concept of federalism even is. But when you examine it, there is not going to be just one person that saves this country. I mean, listen, I would love the candidate that comes in and says, you know what, I'm gutting the federal bureaucracy by 50%. Consequences be damned, and we'll just see where the chips fall. I would love that. Okay, but I don't anticipate that happening anytime soon. And it's a lot easier for candidates to win elections by promising stuff because people like stuff.
Mhm.
You know, Republicans and conservatives, they'll constantly say, we need to cut spending. But then when you talk about certain program, but you can't cut that program.
Right.
We need
Yeah.
that program. And the reality is that there's going to be no one savior to this country. Now, with that being said, the United States has seen its power and influence decline dramatically. There's zero dispute about that. On every single front over the last 3.5 years, Americans are far worse off than they were. On the international front, obviously, we see the global instability. We see the conflicts increasing. We see the tensions increasing. We see the lack of respect towards the United States. You see rising powers like China trying to corral the BRIC nations to serve as a backstop to the U.S. power and influence. So we have hit our decline. Like any great empire in past history, there's a point where you reach your pinnacle and then you begin to decline. And the question is, well, have we reached our pinnacle yet? And I don't think any single one of us can answer that. History will be the judge of that. But what I will say is if we go through another 3.5 years of what we just went through, it is going to be a calamity. And I don't see a real pathway back, because if we look what's been taking place systematically over the last 20, 30 years, well, it's this idea that the government is actually the savior. And people look at the government, look at the pandemic. How many people rose up and pushed back against the mandates? Most people,
Not
even
many.
people that disagreed with them, they still complied with them, and they followed all the rules. People wanted to be told what to do rather than say, all right, we got to keep our cool. We got to protect the most vulnerable communities. We got to surge resources to the hospitals, but everyone should go live their lives. They shouldn't be living their life in fear of a virus, especially when we knew early on that it was really only old people that were being infected, so that were dying from it. So save those people. Instead, what do? We caused maximum disruption to our society because the people wanted government to tell them what to do. And that's the dangerous aspect. We have to build back the components, the ideas, the American values of personal responsibility, self-reliance, limited government, which is so important, the idea of limited government.
Mhm.
But Democrats, progressives, Republicans, conservatives, they all fail. Independents, they all failed. They all failed. And the largest expansion of government actually came under George W. Bush with the
Yes.
Patriot Act that a lot of Republicans and conservatives supported. That was the tipping point, because the answer was, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, then you should support these measures because they're going to go after terrorists. Now, I've been conservative my whole life. Okay, but I knew at that moment, in fact, I was in my senior year of college and I wrote a paper on it, that we're going down a treacherous road with that kind of logic, because it's only a matter of time before the government begins to look at its own people with suspicion. See, when the threat of Al Qaeda and ISIS is gone, and at the time it was just Al Qaeda, well, you can't have hundreds of billions of dollars going to a Department of Homeland Security and all the intelligence and law enforcement components based on a threat that doesn't exist. So the second the threat is gone, you're going to hear a lot of calls to cut the funding. So you have to invent new threats. Well, now we have new threats, right? Domestic terrorists, parents at school board meetings, traditional Catholics, Trump supporters, and you see where it goes. And that's why we have to get back to these concepts. Now, I don't think Trump can actually fix it, but I do think that he could certainly plug a lot of the leaks that are currently taking place, and he could begin to pare it down. I do think that because of what the bureaucracy did to him, I don't think he's going to have that much love for them when it comes time for funding these agencies and
God, I hope
departments.
so.
So I do believe that he will begin to start cutting the funding. And if you cut the funding, you kill the beast.
Yeah.
Right. Skaggs, you had a pretty good comment on when Trump announced that. Is he going to abolish the
This
Board
is
of
going to be
Education?
my follow-up
Yeah.
question to you, especially
Yeah.
you, Professor Giordano, who's in this line of work, which is school. Donald Trump, and he's now mentioned it a couple times, announced that he intends to abolish the Department of Education. So I'm not giving my own opinion. Everybody who watches the show knows what it is. But so I see that, and I'm put myself in the shoes of like some suburban mom who's going to be like, oh my God, what? He's going to abolish the Department of Education? He wants our kids to be idiots. What do you think about that whole plan? And what would you say to that mom?
Well, my first question would be, so what exactly, name one thing the Department of Education has done to improve education within the United States. Give me one thing that they've actually done. Because the funny part is that it's not like the Department of Education has any real control over curriculums. They could bribe states with federal tax dollars and grant funding and everything. But the Department of Education doesn't really control. If it closed down tomorrow, I will guarantee you nobody would even notice. Okay, the Department of Education hasn't done one successful thing. If we look at it from it's being elevated to a cabinet level department, the most successful thing done for education was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And that was passed before it became a cabinet level department, when it was simply the Office of Education. And it doesn't need to be a cabinet level department. My argument with the Department of Education, we're not creating Einsteins. Proficiency levels are at historic lows. The academic achievement gap is the widest it's ever been. So if we continue to pump money into an education system that's failing, well, maybe we need to rethink how we approach education. Maybe it isn't a money issue. Maybe it's the quality of education students are receiving. Maybe there's cultural issues going on. Maybe it's the technological distractions. We in the United States have to start getting creative. We have to start thinking outside the box. We tend to oversimplify issues, and all you have is the fear, right? If you shut down the Department of Education, you hate children. You want children to be dumb. You want children to be illiterate. And that fear actually works. That suburban mom will actually listen to that without realizing that if the Department of Education ceased to exist tomorrow, the schools will still be open. The curriculums will still mostly be the same. Maybe get rid of some of the Common Core stuff, but for the most part, the curriculums will remain the same. You'll have the same low standards that you have now that simply cycles every student through the system, and nothing will really change. The worst part of closing the Department of Education, the people that it would actually impact the most and hit the most, are those that are low income entering college that are on Pell Grants. Those are the only people that would suffer. And guess what? We could do a carve out for them. We could figure out a program to help the low income with the Pell Grants, as opposed to maintaining this $65-70 billion monstrosity. I don't even know what the fiscal cost is this year, but it's about $70 billion a year, maybe a little bit more now. That's from a couple of years ago. We would save a lot of money if we got rid of that.
So well, that's where you get the money from.
Students more money in the Pell Grants.
Yeah.
Right.
I was just going to say you could transfer the money. It
could be used more wisely, perhaps. But I'm probably getting ahead of myself here. But what Chris was pointing to was a tweet I said the other day. But I think if he were able, actually, Trump being he, to pull this off, in my opinion, it's like a red pill moment for certain people. Where if you take something like the Department of Education, which they're going to have that response to, oh my God, he wants the kids to be dumb. Then he actually abolishes it, and maybe results end up becoming better in the long term. People go like, oh, man, why did I used to think that we needed the federal government to have this department for this certain thing, especially something like education? Now I feel like people are going to be more open to the idea. Maybe we could start getting rid of other departments that that people are going to be talking about that we don't need. That's what I'm hoping on, beyond even just student education stuff.
Listen,
like
I'll tell you right now, you could cut 20% of every single government budget, and I could guarantee you nobody would feel a thing.
Yeah.
Nobody would feel the.
Well, I mean, the White House is empty and the country's still running. So
yeah,
we don't,
There's no one
have
there,
a sitting
that's
president.
for sure.
Yeah, we don't have a sitting president, and everything's just fine.
But he's still collecting his salary, though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
only issue I see with what you just said, though, Skaggs, is we as Americans would have to remember the education system was cut. You know what I mean? Like,
Short attention spans.
Yeah, we have
Well-
such a short attention span. Like after a year of it being gone, be like, oh, the kids are doing better. I wonder why. They probably don't even remember. You know?
And the second there's a hiccup, and so if you look at it, and you could apply this to every single government department, agency, and program. So take the idea of the illegal immigration problem that we're facing, right? So now for the first time in at least in my lifetime that I've seen, at least the last 30 years, we've seen that the American people support deportations. 54% of the American people support deportations. They want to see mass deportations. Now, let's say Trump gets in and they start these mass deportations. The second it gets slightly ugly and there's a camera there videoing it, then you're going to have all these people in these suburban communities be like, oh my God, we can't do this anymore. This is horrific. You know, how are we saying that we're a moral peoples? We're the land of immigrants and blah. People are frauds. Okay. Ordinary people are frauds and they quickly forget. So, Chris, you're absolutely right.
No.
Okay? You cut it, you get rid of it, and people will forget and they'll just move on to the next shiny object because the attention spans of gnats. And the second things get difficult, then people will start to change their tune because they don't want to seem like that evil, mean person that wants to kick people out of the country. They want to be that public virtue signal that gets patted on the back because they feel like they're a moral human being.
When
Sovereign nation. And you start with the criminal element first. I don't think any single American is going to care if we start deporting criminal illegal aliens. I think most Americans would actually celebrate that, except
unless you're a Democrat. Unless you're a Democrat voting against deporting, immigrants who attack women and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's bizarre, right? I mean, they're talking about, Haitians eating cats and dogs, and they're saying that everyone's racist for even saying that. Okay, let's not talk about cats and dogs. Let's talk about the children being raped in Massachusetts. I mean, maybe we should look at that. Where's the outrage towards that? These are actual human beings, our children that are being preyed upon by people who shouldn't even be in this country. So, yeah, it's one of those things. The American people, we're a finicky bunch, man. And the second the optics change, we quickly change our tune rather than standing strong saying, listen, it's ugly, it sucks, but it's something that has to be done.
People don't have the stomach for it. I'm trying to think, like, when as an American did being this, I mean, it's inauthentic, but they think it's authentic. When did being a virtuous person become the top priority in this country, that you will hold no principles, hold no values, whatever is the truth or the thing in the moment is the thing you support because you are this virtuous being? I never got, like, I'm fine with being called the bad guy for wanting to deport illegals. I'm fine with anybody who wants to come to this country, like Trump says, just use the door, right? It's strange to think, like, at some point, like, being in the moment virtuous became top priority.
Well, it's because Americans have been trained to operate by emotion rather than using reason and logic. Okay. And that's part of the problem, that we inject emotion into every single decision when it comes to policy. And a lot of times you can have emotion when it comes to policy. You have to take a step back, cut your emotions out of it, and actually use reason and logic. Take the dropping of the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. People today will look at that and be like, oh my God, that's so horrific that we dropped those 2 atomic bombs, killing all those people and blah, blah, blah. Well, if you actually look at the military estimates, if we did the invasion of Japan, we were going to lose about another 250,000 soldiers. Japan was going to lose about another 400,000 soldiers, and 1 million Japanese would be killed in the crossfire, and every Japanese city would have been bombed out. So what's really more humane? Was it dropping the atomic bombs to end the war, or was it going to do an invasion of Japan where far more would have been not only killed, but maimed and suffered horrible deaths? And it's not an easy question, right? These are moral, philosophical questions that we're asking. But if you cut the emotion out of it, it makes the decision a little bit easier. And that's part of the problem. Everyone is guided by emotion. And then we've dumbed the system down so much that we make it as if the issues are simply black and white. when in reality, there's this enormous gray area that exists that people don't talk about, that they don't understand. And interestingly enough, Trump actually does. I mean, he is well versed when it comes to policy that people don't respect it. They don't understand it because of the far left media. I mean, take his spiel about electric cars.
Yeah.
He talks about, hey, we're not building any power plants. How can you have an electric vehicle fleet throughout the entirety of the United States? Our electrical grid systems are already at capacity. They're already on the brink. AI is now taxing them even more. And you want to make everyone drive an electric car. Well, the grid system can't handle that. So until you take care of the grid system, you can't have an electric vehicle mandate. But it's not just about a grid system. It's also about the roads and the bridges. Okay, people don't realize, but asphalt and concrete are certified pounds. How many pounds of pressure can sit on the roadways? Well, electric cars are
Heavy.
double the pound tonnage of a regular vehicle. I'm sorry, but if we go to an electric vehicle mandate, I don't want to be sitting in traffic on the Throgs Neck Bridge with a bunch of other electric vehicles because that bridge will collapse. That bridge will come down because the weight is too much. It's over capacity. So we oversimplify issues. You either love the climate and you don't want to pollute anymore, so we have to go to this, electric vehicle mandate, or you're evil and you want to destroy and pollute the planet because you like oil and you like these gas guzzlers and you're a horrible human being.
Give me a
Meanwhile,
Dodge
it's like,
Charger.
no, there's this gray area. I want to breathe in clean air. I want to drink clean water, but I also want to get from A to B without collapsing on a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I like my power. I like electricity. It works well for me.
Yeah, it's always ironic how, I'd say conservatives are more in tune with nature. They're like hunting, conservation, things like that. And it's usually the city-slicking liberals who are concerned about the climate and things like that, but they don't actually ever participate in any of those things. And
Trump spent 45 minutes talking about the forest services in California and wildfires and how if they just kept up with going into the minutia detail of brush and knocking down dead trees. And it's like, can anyone really envision Kamala Harris giving that much depth on any policy?
No. She probably didn't even know that department existed.
She should be asked about the forest services.
That'd be interesting. So, Cap, I know you're probably, I was chomping at the bit about the Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah, I was sitting here and I just saw the mushroom cloud in your eyes go about.
I did see the mushroom cloud on the introduction. That's why I had to bring it up.
Yeah, that'd be a debate for another time. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but we've actually had that debate a couple times on the show. Just thinking about it in retrospect. But anyway,
you might have a more recent example soon, sadly.
I hope not.
6 weeks, we find out.
We got kids, right? I hope they, there's a world for them to live in. So let's end this part about the election. I just want your unbiased, objective prediction over who you think is going to actually win the election.
Anyone that tells you they know who's going to win this election is a fraud. This is the most unpredictable election that we've ever witnessed. Okay. And there's nothing we could compare it. It's not like I could be like, okay, well, we have similar variables in the 1824 election. So let me compare. We can't compare this election with any other election. If this was normal times, the first assassination attempt would have answered the question. We would have known who the next president of the United States was. We are living through the most bizarre times right now. And honestly, it's a coin flip. I do believe that it is going to be a very close election. It's going to come down to a handful of states. Now, people will say, oh, you're just hedging your bets over there, saying that it's a coin toss. But that's the reality. Personally, I hope it's a clear, overwhelming, decisive victory. Obviously, in favor of Trump, because I despise Kamala Harris. But I want it to be overwhelming, clear, and decisive because I don't want to deal with any of the BS. And maybe if there is an overwhelming victory and it is decisive, maybe the people in the bureaucracy will start to think, I better change my attitude in how I handle government affairs. I need to be reminded that I'm a public servant. The public doesn't exist to serve me. I exist to serve them. Maybe it will bring the Democrats back to this area of sanity. It's not like Trump's some deep ideologue. Like Trump's not a conservative. To him, everything is negotiable.
Right.
You could actually work with him. And that's what made the whole hatred of him in the first term so bizarre. Because if you got a President Pence, you're not going to be able to negotiate, particularly on the social issues. He is a devout conservative. But someone like Trump, he'll work with you. Why didn't you work with the man to get things done? and you could have celebrated. You could have gotten half of what you wanted. But I do think if he does have an overwhelming victory, I think the Democrats will begin to recalibrate because they're going to recognize they either recalibrate or they're going to go off to irrelevancy. If Trump loses, then it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the Republican Party, because there's going to be a come to Jesus moment to try and understand what is the soul of the Republican Party? Where do they stand on the issues? And unfortunately, the big part of the Republicans' problem is that they abandoned the people that they were supposed to serve, right? You don't hear them talk about fiscal responsibility. Deficits increased under Republicans too. And that's a big part of the problem. So Republicans are going to have to reevaluate what is their platform? What do they stand for? Who are they? And both Democrat, Republican, the bureaucracy, the one thing that they need to realize, they despise Trump so much, but it's because of everything they've done over the last 30 years that gave Trump the opportunity to become president of the United States. If they didn't backstab every single American, if they didn't forget why they exist, why they're in these positions, then maybe you wouldn't have seen a rise of Trump. But they failed us.
Yeah.
And
I've
Trump
heard
was
people
the
say
answer
he's the symptom,
to
not
say,
the cause.
F you,
Yeah.
we're going to go outside the box, and we got the guy with the bull in the china shop that's going to knock everything down because everyone is sick and tired of what they're saying.
Yeah.
It's very well put. It's very well put.
All right. I thought we could maybe transition with some little bit of somewhat, I guess you could say, breaking news. I saw this morning, Trump himself tweeting, and then he talked about it a little bit later today, where he said, "Big threats on my life by Iran. The entire U.S. military is watching and waiting. Moves were already made by Iran that didn't work out, but they will try again. Not a good situation for anyone. I'm surrounded by more men, guns, and weapons than I have ever seen before. Thank you to the Congress for unanimously approving far more money to the Secret Service. 0 no votes, strictly bipartisan. Nice to see Republicans and Democrats get together on something. An attack on a former president is a death wish for the attacker." So, Professor Giordano, we've talked a lot about the 2 assassination attempts on Trump. I thought the last one was way more interesting than the first one. We don't know anything about the first one, really. The second one with Ryan Routh here, like, in my opinion,
He was able to put a bounty out.
Yeah, which isn't even suspicious in of itself that they released a message about that, as if they're trying to entice someone to do it and claim
coerce a lone gunman that's been on an FBI watch list.
Yeah, but I see the previous 2 attempts, at least in my opinion, and put my tinfoil hat on, it's more likely, I've seen more compelling evidence that it's some sort of deep state intelligence agency apparatus, maybe, that was trying to use these guys or something to get rid of Trump. I haven't seen any compelling evidence about Iran being involved besides the government telling me, right? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but no, I'm looking. No, when we look at it, first of all, the 2 cases themselves are just completely bizarre. They're just bizarre, right? So let's just say we take everything at face value. If you look at the first shooter, it was generally an unremarkable kid, right? I mean, he's not like someone that really led a remarkable life. I'm not trying to be mean, but he was just
visited the FBI office all the time.
Kept to himself. Didn't have an online presence, which is bizarre given his age. He grew up in the technological generation. But more importantly, given that he didn't have an online presence, I find it completely bizarre that the kid would have encrypted foreign accounts on his phone. Like, that just simply doesn't make sense. He had 3 foreign email accounts. Now, I was in emergency management, Homeland Security. Okay, I understand the nature of cybersecurity. Guess what? I have a Yahoo and Gmail account, and then I have the business account. Okay, I don't deal with classified information where I'm getting encrypted information. Like, if you're a reporter and you have people that are coming to you to serve as sources and everything, yeah, you want an encrypted account. A 20-year-old kid gets encrypted email account. That's just bizarre to me. So that scenario is bizarre, and we still know very little about it. We see the incompetency of government, and someone thinks that that there's no way the Secret Service could possibly be that incompetent that this could happen. No, they actually can, right? We spent 20 years in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is better armed and equipped today than prior to 9/11. So yes, we have an incompetent government. The second shooter is even more bizarre. By all accounts, this guy was derelict, right? He had a long criminal history. In 2002, he was charged with weapons of mass destruction for an automatic weapon. He only served probation. Now, anyone that's a charge you usually go to jail for. And if you have prior convictions, you're definitely going to jail. But he just got probation. So that right there is a red flag. Then he gives a box to someone he knows a few days before or a few months before he goes to try and assassinate Trump. Again, this is like really bizarre. Like the person never went into the box until 3 days after he learned that Ryan Routh was the shooter. And I'm sitting there like, if my friend came to me and was like, do me a favor, here's a box. I need you to hold on to it. And if you ever see anything about me on the news, then open it. The second my friend leaves, I'm opening that box to find out what's
if you do that to me, Chris, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to sit there and wait. But so the guy gets 6 cell phones in his vehicle. Like, but here's the thing. The guy was deadbeat. He was derelict. He didn't have money, yet he was traveling to the Ukraine. He was traveling to Afghanistan.
He had contacts in Pakistan.
He was trying to recruit fighters for the Ukraine, for the Russia's war in Ukraine. And I'm sitting there like, it's not cheap to, first of all, it's not easy to travel.
Normal.
It's not like I can hop on a Delta Airlines.
And use example of like if one of the two of us went there to go do that, we wouldn't be able to do it. We wouldn't know where to begin, who to talk to, anything like that. If you just dropped us in Ukraine.
How do you even get these contacts?
Well, not only how do you Afghanistan? The second you get into Afghanistan as an American, you got a target on your back.
Right.
I mean, and it's not like our government isn't like paying attention if you're an American crossing the border and going into Afghanistan. Like our government has a pretty sophisticated intelligence apparatus out there. And so so it's just bizarre. He had no money, but he was traveling the world, acting like a war dog, completely bizarre, has 6 cell phones. And then the government releases a letter that he wrote, which, again, it's just weird. They didn't have to release his manifesto. They still haven't released the Tennessee mass shooting manifesto because it was a train shooter. But this guy, they released the first page saying, yeah, if I fail and anyone else kills Trump, I'll give you $150,000.
Yeah. It's like suspicious in of itself, in my opinion.
Exactly. And what makes people gravitate towards conspiracy theories is that the government's not providing any information. So there's all these gaps. And when you have all these gaps, Americans are a linear people. We like things to be clear, even, and straight. When there's gaps, we tend to fill in those gaps with what might make sense to us. And that's why we say it can't be incompetence. There's got to be some grand conspiracy. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But if the government just wants to rule out the conspiracies, just release the information you have. But they haven't done that, and they're not going to do that. We're still waiting on the JFK files, right? I mean, think about this logically.
70 years later, yeah.
If it was simply the idea of Lee Harvey Oswald, he was this disgruntled American that had worked for the government in some capacity and decided he was going to take out Kennedy. Well, then release the files that show that, and that's it. Everyone moves on, and all the conspiracy theories will die, right? But instead, they're like, no, we're not releasing the files because it will cause grave harm to the United States. Not only will it cause grave harm to the United States, we know that Congress passed a law that these files were supposed to be released several years ago, but we're still not going to be releasing the files. Well, gee, do you think maybe I'm going to think a government agency had something to do with the JFK assassination? Because if it was just Lee Harvey Oswald, you would have released the file.
Yeah.
On that one, I think at this point, if they were to release them and then it ends up being a big nothing burger, just what the story, everyone knows the story has been, I don't think anyone's going to believe it at this point, right? Because of how they
like,
play,
we trolled you this whole time.
Right. Yeah. Why did you play keep away so hard for so many years and end up being nothing? It wouldn't make sense.
That would be a hell of a plot twist. Yeah.
So I'm just skeptical of the Iran.
I am too.
I'm not saying that Iran wouldn't want to assassinate Trump, right? But given the backdrop of the tensions, which I really wanted to get into here in the region, everybody knows, right, what's been going on, now, especially between Israel and Gaza and Hamas, and now Hezbollah. The last couple weeks, I'd say things have really picked up since the Beeper attack. It was maybe 2 weeks ago, which we haven't got a chance to talk about. So first of all, let me get on this one thing, the Beeper thing, because we haven't got a chance.
People still wear pages. Look at that.
Right. Well, actually, I thought it was pretty ingenious by them, right? Because at least they thought it was ingenious, because it's like a low tech way to communicate that they probably thought couldn't be monitored or reached. just like China using the spy balloon. Like, let's just float a balloon over there instead of using. I think that's probably what they were thinking. Now, I again, Captain and I, we're not Hamas apologists or anything like that. We're America first guys, right? So we're critical of the government of Israel sometimes, depending on some of these actions they take and our involvement and funding of things like this. Now, I see the beeper thing, and I'm like, oh boy, like it seems like a terrorist attack to me, to be honest with you. Like I could see Hezbollah doing something like that to us here, sabotaging things, blowing them up, etc. What did you think about that one attack first? Let's just start there.
I thought it was one of the most sophisticated, brilliant operations that I have ever witnessed in my studies of international relations, intelligence, and all that. I mean, when you look at this operation, you had to be able to get the supply chain down to a science to know when those beepers were going to be manufactured, when they were going to be shipped out, when you could intercept them. And that tells me that there were high-level members of Hamas that were involved in this, that the Mossad recruited on their side. And it's clear that that's been taking place. So when you look at the beepers and then the two-way radios right after that, this was an extraordinarily sophisticated operation. And Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. I mean, listen, when you look at Hezbollah, this is an organization, and don't take them lightly. I always tell people that they're far more capable than Hamas is, have over 150,000 missiles that they can fire. We now learn that they have ballistic missile capability. They're ready to fight. But I think Hezbollah was really caught off guard. And listen, operations like these, obviously innocent civilians are going to be harmed in this. There's little doubt about it. But there were a lot of high-profile people that were attacked in this. Like, why is the Iranian ambassador carrying around a Hezbollah beeper? Why is that happening? And I don't think people realize. So you said before, like, you're not sure if there's an Iranian nexus to really try and assassinate Trump. Iran will. I actually studied Iran extensively. It was my thesis to graduate with a master's degree in political science. The Iranian government absolutely would try and assassinate Trump. They want to assassinate him as revenge for Qasem Soleimani, but they would never do it by their own hands, right? I mean, their special forces are actually capable. They are sophisticated special forces, the Quds Force, and they know that if an Iranian takes a shot at a former president and kills a former president and current presidential candidate, that's a declaration of war. The United States is going to war, no ifs, ands, or buts, and there's a lot of Democrats and Republicans that would actually support that. But they know if they recruit someone to do it, well, now we have the plausible deniability. I mean, listen, we did the same thing, right? Look at what the operations we did in South America in the 1980s. It was, well, we're not going to do it directly, but we'll fund these groups to do our dirty work. Same thing holds true. We just arrested a Pakistani about 3 weeks ago who was trying to recruit people to try and assassinate the former president of the United States. So Iran's hands. Would it surprise me if it turned out this guy had contact with Iran for some sort of reason? It wouldn't shock me at all. Do I have any evidence to say Iran's behind this? No, I have zero evidence to say Iran is behind these two assassination attempts on Trump. Am I suspicious of our government to a large? Yes, I'm very suspicious. I don't trust our government at all, given what's been going on. As far as the Israel's war with Hamas and Hezbollah, again, this is just a failure of American leadership. I mean, if Biden was a real leader, he would have said to Bibi Netanyahu, listen, you got 30 to 45 days to do what you have to do. We're not going to stop you. Just go in there hard, go in there quick, try and take out Hamas and Hezbollah as best you can, and that's it. Then you end it after 45 days. We can't have this prolonged conflict going on, especially as we're seeing more conflicts around the world emerge. Instead, you had a president and his administration that was trying to play both sides, actually prolonging this whole conflict. The conflict should have been over already. But now we're seeing that Israel has taken the gloves off. Israel's basically saying, screw it. We're going after anyone that has tried to attack us or harm Israel over the course of the last 30 years. We're targeting you now, and we're going to decimate you. And understand this. There's a reason that Israel's doing this, and I will guarantee you behind the scenes, you have the Saudi government encouraging this. You have the Jordanian government encouraging this. You have the Egyptian government encouraging this. They want to see Hamas and Hezbollah routed because they know it weakens Iran. And in this part of the world, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they may come out and publicly criticize Israel to a certain degree, but they all support what Israel's doing right now. And the most amazing thing, though, is you haven't heard much criticism. You go back 30 years, if Israel was doing this, the Middle East would have been on fire right now, the entirety of the Middle East. People would be revolting in the streets against their own government for not doing anything. Yet right now, everything is fairly quiet in these countries because they all view it that this is coming from Iran and Iran is the problem. Saudi Arabia has come to the conclusion we could live with an Israel in our backyard. We cannot live with a nuclear armed Iran. And that's what the calculation is. Now, Iran's not stupid either, right? Hezbollah, we're getting reports, went to Iran this week and said, hey, listen, you got to conduct an attack on Israel. They're hammering us right now. We need your help. And Iran's like, yeah, we're going to just take a step back right now and see how this thing plays out for a little bit. We're going to be at the United Nations this week. We don't want to do anything there. But Iran is a thorn on our side. And the Biden foreign policy of don't really didn't go that well, right? I mean, I don't think the Iranian mullahs expected when Biden said don't. They didn't respect that.
Have you ever heard of, I think it was General Petraeus's insurgent math quote, where he says, I think it's like, what's 10 minus 2? It's not 8, it's 20, right? And when we try and kill some of these insurgents with certain sorts of strikes, you might kill 2 of them, but you've pissed off, 12 other people, because you've killed maybe some family members or something like that. It's not necessarily a winning strategy. I just look at some of the way that Israel has conducted itself. This just going back to using the beeper thing. I know a lot of people, including yourself, have said it was very targeted. I don't see it as a very targeted. Now, everyone in Hezbollah probably had one of those beepers, right? But they didn't know exactly where every single person's beeper was at when they pushed the button.
No, they didn't
blow them up, right? So the way I look at that is, okay, well, at least like the guys probably had beepers nearby. But there's going to be collateral damage to that. And when you do an attack like that, the collateral damage is then going to kind of motivate more people to want to join Hezbollah's cause, right? And then I kind of know how people will react to such things. So then I look at it from the point of Israel. I'm like, are you actually getting to the point where you're making any sort of progress in this war or in this region, right? Like if you just keep using tactics like that, you keep pissing more people off, are you ever going to get to a threshold where you can actually defeat that ideology or whatever it is you want to claim you're trying
I think your argument actually works better with Hamas than Hezbollah. And the reason I say that is because Hezbollah is based in Lebanon. A lot of Lebanese people do not like Hezbollah. They view Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Lebanon faced, several years civil war, a bloody civil war that took place. And so you even have Lebanese people that are okay with what's taking place, what Israel's doing to Hezbollah. With Hamas, it's a different story. So I think you're on something there. So when we look at Hamas and when we look at any terror organization, you could take United States and Al-Qaeda. By using the military and using force, you could decapitate their capabilities. You could hurt the operational command and control. You could hurt the operational capabilities. But the ideology still exists, and the ideology could actually spread, and that's your point. If you look at Palestine and Gaza, how many more members of Hamas are you creating? So you may have a short-term security, right? Because security-wise, you destroyed the tunnels, you're destroying the weaponry, you took out senior leadership, and so you have this short-term gain. But 20 years from now, when those kids grow up, I mean, if you look at it, the kids, the Hamas terrorists of today were watching Farquhar when they were little kids growing up. I don't know if people know, but Farquhar was the Hamas version of Mickey Mouse. And Farquhar was geared towards 6, 7, 8, and 9-year-olds over in the Gaza Strip. And in one episode, an Israeli Mossad agent ended up killing Farquhar live on the air. And so you see the indoctrination that takes place with this ideology. I mean, imagine being a little kid and you're watching a program and an Israeli agent ends up killing your beloved character, Mickey Mouse.
We have like Russian Mickey, killed Goofy, Mickey Mouse. Pluto. Now. Yeah.
Their Mickey Mouse is very different than ours. He wears a suicide vest. But when you're looking at it, you could try and kill as many of the Hamas figures as you want. You got to figure out how to destroy the ideology. I think what Israel's hoping for is that the people of Gaza are so mad, so upset with Hamas that they're ready to banish them from the area. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case. If we look at our war with Al Qaeda, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, did more against the ideology of Al Qaeda in one speech than we did in 18 or 19 or 20 years of war. He came out and said, this radical version of Islam must end. We're not going to support these madrasas, the clerics, that if you go down and you teach this Wahhabi sect or the Salafi sect, you're going to have to answer to the royal family, to the crown prince and our police force. And anyone knows what that means is you're dead. The Saudi government will kill you. Now, Mohammed bin Salman has street credibility, right? These people aren't going to listen to a guy like me with a New York accent going into their area saying you shouldn't subscribe to this ideology. But they are going to listen to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who traces his bloodline back to their prophet Muhammad. He's got the street credibility when it comes to the religion. And he also has the money and the means. Saudi Arabia funded a lot of these madrasas. So when he said, we're turning off the spigots if you don't change your ways, and if you clerics are going to preach this crap, we're going to kill you. Well, we started to see a downturn, less people inclined to join these radical organizations. I think that the only path forward, I think, for some type of stability in the Gaza region and Israel is to have some Arab country run it till they could figure things out. Like maybe put Egypt in charge of it, given its location.
Of Gaza and the West Bank, you mean? Like of those territories?
Well, the West Bank, you have the Palestinian Authority, so it's a little bit different. But even, when we look at the Palestinian Authority, they're corrupt as all hell. I mean, this is an area that has received literally over $100 billion of funding from the United States and other countries, and could have built themselves up to be major tourist hubs, but they chose a different path, and the people are still impoverished. But I think definitely for Gaza, I think that you need, an Arab country, a predominantly Muslim country, to come in to govern it. I'm not saying take the territory of the Gaza Strip. I'm saying to govern it until things could be sorted out. And yes, maybe even in the West Bank, maybe Jordan goes into the West Bank and governs it until they could sort things out, and Egypt goes into Gaza and governs it, or put together a council, right? An emissary from Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, whatever. Put together an emissary and they watch over it till things get sorted out. I think that would be the best case forward. Do I see that happening anytime soon? Not necessarily. What I think everyone's waiting for is Iran going to respond to Israel. And when that happens, how does this expand beyond the theater of just Palestine, Israel, and Lebanon?
It's an interesting proposal. I don't think I've ever heard one like that before.
Well, that's why you have a brilliant guy like
sure.
me on.
Of course. I wish more conservatives were making that sort of proposal instead of I don't
just beating the war drums.
It's a nuanced proposal, right? I will say I don't hear any of that from most of our conservative leadership. It's all finish them and this, that, and whatever, and it's not like any substance to anything that most of them say. So I appreciate that. Cap, I've been asking a lot of questions and talking a lot. Do you have any follow-ups?
No, I mean, you guys covered so much stuff that I was the only thing that I was going to comment on was the only thing that worries me about the tweet that Skag shared with Trump talking about Iran trying to assassinate him. Skaggs, you're a bit suspicious of that as well, right? And I feel the same, like, could they potentially, and I think Skaggs, you brought this point up in our personal conversations, could they potentially just be trying to, make sure they still get the war they want if Trump comes into office? Our military, people, top brass has lied to him before, during his first administration. Why not start lying to him now? So when he comes in, he might be a little bit more susceptible to, invasion or war with Iran.
They, I think, Captain, what we were talking about, it's kind of like neocons.
Yeah.
I think neocons have wanted a war with Iran forever. Are they kind of trying to lay the groundwork by, perhaps floating out the idea of a personal attack on Donald Trump? Now, everybody knows Donald Trump took out Soleimani and all this stuff. He's not, he's not going to mess around when it comes to Iran. So let's start laying the groundwork now for if he wins, especially on the heels of 2 failed assassination attempts.
Yeah, but I don't think Trump's that gullible. I think even if there is evidence that Iran was behind these attacks, I don't think Trump would be like, okay, let's go to war with them. I think that Trump would actually take a much more nuanced approach.
Okay.
Trump is a business guy. He knows the cost versus benefit analysis when it comes to things like warfare. This isn't the 1900s where you get to go in, conquer a land, take all its resources, and enrich yourself. Those days are gone. He also has a pulse of the people and understands Americans are war weary. And I think that the American people should know, and maybe the generals don't want to tell everyone, but our military readiness levels are at historic lows. Like, we haven't been this unprepared for military conflict since pre-World War II. Our stockpiles are down by 30%. Our recruitment efforts have fallen tens of thousands of recruits short for the last 3.5 years. And so it was a poll that came out in the Military Times. 19% of warrant officers said that we're ready to deploy anywhere in the world and fight a war today. Only 19% believe that. Now, why is that important? Well, the warrant officers are the one that lead the troops into battle. And that means 81% of them don't believe we're prepared. I think it's much more complicated than that. I also think that a lot of generals are going to be retiring if President Trump actually wins. I think that a lot of them have culpability in what took place in Afghanistan. I mean, listen, you just had over 700 national security experts come out and endorse Kamala Harris for president.
Yeah.
Many
along with the IRS.
Were directly responsible for 20 years of war, $2 trillion spent, 2,400 soldiers coming back in flag-draped coffins, tens of thousands wounded. And the entire time they were telling us that we were making progress, that the Afghanistan government was stable, that the Afghanistan security forces can hold that country. And yet, within a week of Biden announcing our withdrawal, the country collapsed. The Taliban took over as we're withdrawing. And not a single person was held accountable for that. I said earlier, the Taliban is better armed and equipped today than it was prior to 9/11. And not a single person was held accountable. I think that, and I'm hoping, I don't know this, but I do believe that a second Trump term may restore some accountability within the system, because let's face it, government is the only industry where you could be the most incompetent failure. You could routinely fail time and time again. But if you're dotting the I's, you're crossing the T's, and you're following protocols, you get promoted. That has got to end. We have to start firing generals that failed to complete their missions. We have to fire State Department officials that were lying to us, telling us we were making progress. We have to fire intelligence officials who were saying that we were making progress and the Taliban was weak and they couldn't recapture the country. All these people need to go, and we need to start putting competent people in these high-level positions of power.
Yeah, and it would be poetic justice if it's the "you're fired" guy is the guy who ends up firing them all.
Good point.
Yeah. So okay, I was saying before in my tweet earlier today, like, I need a white pill from a Trump supporter or a MAGA supporter today on this whole Iran assassination thing. I think you gave that to me, so thank you, Professor G.
Well, I just
he's not gullible enough to just immediately charge into war because there's a personal threat on his own life.
I listen, there are a lot of Democrats and Republicans that would love to get into a war with Iran. I think right now, the smart people, and there are some smart people left, are saying that would be a disaster. Okay, we are far more powerful than Iran. Our military is more superior than Iran, and the Iranian government would collapse. But look at the challenges we faced in Afghanistan and Iraq. Iran is far more capable than both those countries. Their military is more capable than both those countries. But also, what will happen, I will guarantee I wouldn't bet my life on it, but I'll guarantee it anyway, is that you then open the door to a World War III scenario, because the battle lines are drawn, right? We know what the alliances are. You have Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, Brazil on one side. On the other side, you have the European nations, the United States, Japan, Australia, South Korea. We know what the battle lines are. If we're bogged down in over in Iran, Russia could say, well, now the United States can't support the Ukraine. They're not going to be able to give the Ukrainians munitions. Now let's just go full force in. And then maybe they could go into other European countries at that point, because they know the United States is, if we couldn't fight in Afghanistan and Iraq at the same time, if we were having that much trouble with those two countries, how would we be able to do that with Russia and Iran? We wouldn't. And so then you'd have Europe having to go to war, hold the line in Poland, because that's all Britain, France, and Poland are the only ones with the strong militaries in Europe. And they would be able to hold the line. It gives China the opportunity to capture Taiwan because they know that we couldn't respond to that. You have Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, South Korea that are suspicious of China. They see China's ambition take over the Pacific. So they're going to get into a defensive mode and start taking on China. Kim Jong-un looks at the opportunity to see South Korea at that point. So if war with Iran does happen, I do believe that chain of events, and maybe I'm wrong, but I do believe that chain of events is very possible. And that's the World War III scenario that we kind of fear. But I also believe that cooler heads will prevail, right? I mean,
Hope so.
If it takes on Hezbollah and Hamas, Israel's going to win. If Israel takes on Iran, I mean, there's a reason Iran hasn't retaliated yet against Israel for the killing of the Hamas leader that was in Iranian territory. Because the Iranian authorities, they don't want a war with Israel. They know that the Israeli military is stronger than their military. And they also know that if the Israeli Mossad was able to assassinate the Hamas leader inside Iran by planting a bomb there and then 6 months later detonating it. Well, what else in the Ayatollah toilet seat, right? I mean, you know, what else is in Israel, and how many Iranian officials in the government are actually working for the Mossad?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Very good question. Yeah.
Well, I hope that, again, the white bill. I'm optimistic. I hope that Donald Trump can be the deal maker,
the cooler head,
all of that shit from happening, because it would be awful, not just for America, of course, but for everyone around the world. So, hopefully,
yeah.
All right.
We're gonna do tweets of the week, or we're gonna
no, we'll save that for
not a problem.
Next week. Yeah, I don't even have anything anyway this week. So
sounds good.
Let's sign off, and
yes.
Giordano, thanks again for coming on with us. I want to shout out your show again and where everyone can find you.
Anytime. People can check out the PAS report. Just go to PASreport.com. You can follow me on all the social media platforms at PAS Report, and you will not be disappointed.
You definitely won't. He puts on a great show, everybody. Nick, thank you so much. You had some great points, great answers. We really appreciate you coming on. We're always a little bit smarter after you come on the show. So thank you again. Doom Nation, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Boys, any last words?
That's it. Follow us on TikTok. I'm going to start doing pre-games, a couple minutes. Yeah.
All right, there you go. See us on TikTok. Adios, Doom Nation.